Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about something pretty interesting. We're going to be looking at turning cow manure into fuel, and we'll be taking a look at a BBC article that talks about this whole thing.
Sounds a little strange at first, right?
It does.
But when you start to think about the scale of how much manure there is and the problems it causes and the potential solutions, it's actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and our deep dive today takes us to Japan, specifically Hokkaido Island. It's famous for, beautiful scenery, amazing dairy farms, and a whole lot of cow poop. Millions of tons every year, to be exact.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Hokkaido has over 1 million cows. Think about that. 1 million cows all producing manure, and they make more than half of Japan's milk.
Wow. It's a lot of milk and a lot of manure. Okay, so we've got this waste management challenge. It's clearly huge. So what makes hydrogen a potential solution here? And how is it different from just, letting the manure decompose naturally?
Well, first of all, hydrogen is a clean fuel. When it burns, it doesn't release any carbon emissions. But the problem has always been figuring out how to produce hydrogen in a way that is both good for the environment and doesn't cost a ton of money. Traditional methods like using methane or electrolysis, they have some downsides.
Okay, so where do the cows fit into all of this? It's not some kind of super cow methane to hydrogen conversion thing going on in their stomachs, is it?
No, nothing quite that sci-fi. It all starts with a project called the Shikaoi Hydrogen Farm. It was launched back in 2015 by Japan's Ministry of the Environment. And what they're doing is, well, they've created a pretty brilliant circular economy model. They collect manure from the local dairy farms and use something called anaerobic digestion to break it down.
Anaerobic digestion, I've heard of that. Isn't it basically like a big bacterial party in a giant oxygen-free tank?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the bacteria produce biogas, which can be purified into methane and liquid fertilizer. And both those things are pretty valuable.
Okay, so they're not just getting rid of the manure, they're creating useful stuff from it. I like it. So what happens next?
Well, the methane they get from the biogas is what's used to make hydrogen fuel.
So instead of releasing that harmful methane into the atmosphere, they're capturing it and turning it into something we can use. What kind of scale are we talking about here? Can they power a few tractors, or is this something bigger?
Well, currently, the Shikaoi plant can make about 70 cubic meters of hydrogen every day. That's enough to fuel something like 28 vehicles.
28 vehicles. That's not bad. And I'm guessing they're primarily focusing on powering farm vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Like tractors and things that are tough to electrify with, normal batteries.
Exactly. Hydrogen fuel cells are a pretty promising solution when you're talking about sectors that need heavy-duty vehicles that can go long distances. And the really cool part is the circularity doesn't stop there. The leftover slurry from the anaerobic digestion, they use that as fertilizer. So they're reducing the need for chemical fertilizers.
Wow. So they're really trying to close the loop on the whole system, huh?
They are. They're even looking into using formic acid, which is a byproduct of the process, as a way to preserve cattle feed.
Formic acid. I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a simple type of carboxylic acid, like vinegar, but a little stronger. And it occurs naturally in this process. They think it could potentially replace the more harsh chemical preservatives they're using now.
That's awesome. They're really thinking about everything. Okay, so this is all sounding amazing, but let's be real for a minute. Hydrogen has some challenges, right? It's not the easiest fuel to work with.
Oh, you're definitely right about that. Storing it is a major hurdle. It needs to be kept under high pressure. That means you need special tanks. And it also raises some safety concerns.
And what about that embrittlement thing? Doesn't hydrogen weaken metal containers over time?
Yeah, that's another issue. It's a tough one.
And let's not forget that hydrogen is highly flammable. So safety during handling and transportation, that's got to be super important.
Absolutely. You can't mess around with that. And the other big thing is the infrastructure we'd need for hydrogen to be used everywhere just isn't there yet. We need more pipelines, storage facilities, refueling stations, all that stuff. And it all needs a lot of investment.
Right. And then you add in Hokkaido's climate.
Yeah.
It gets pretty cold there, right? So I bet that creates even more challenges, like how do they keep water vapor from freezing during production?
Yeah, all of that needs to be figured out. There are definitely some big technological obstacles to get past, but, they seem to be on the right track.
Okay, so maybe this cow manure to hydrogen idea isn't as simple as it sounds at first, but what about the sustainability angle? Is it really carbon neutral, like some people claim?
Well, the idea behind it being carbon neutral is that the carbon in manure ultimately comes from the grass that cows eat. So it's like a closed loop. Plus, by capturing the methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas, you're actually reducing a major environmental risk.
That's a good point. And what if they powered the whole process with renewable energy, like wind or solar? Wouldn't that make it even more sustainable?
Absolutely. That's a big focus for future development. Figuring out how to use renewables in the production process would make a huge difference in reducing the carbon footprint.
So it's an interesting concept for sure. But let's be realistic. Can this really be scaled up to work in the real world? Hydrogen production is expensive, and the demand for hydrogen vehicles is still pretty low.
Yeah, you're right. Those are some big economic hurdles. Scaling this up isn't just about figuring out how to make more of it, it's also about creating a market for the hydrogen that's being produced. It's tough.
So how is the Shikai plant dealing with those challenges? Are they just kind of hoping for the best?
No, they're actually trying to be proactive about it. To make hydrogen more affordable and competitive with gasoline, they're subsidizing the prices at their plant. And they're also working on building more hydrogen refueling stations across Hokkaido.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Start with the bigger cities and go from there.
Exactly. And it's not just about cow manure either. They're also looking into other waste materials that they could use to make hydrogen.
Really? Like what?
Well, they're looking at everything. They're exploring pig dung, poultry waste, even things like coconut husks.
Coconut husks.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Are there other examples of people doing this kind of like out-of-the-box thinking with waste and hydrogen?
Yeah, there are a few interesting projects popping up. For example, Toyota is doing some research in Thailand on using chicken waste to make hydrogen.
Chicken waste. Okay, this is officially blowing my mind. Are there others?
Oh, yeah. Researchers at the University of Illinois Chicago have developed a method that uses biochar. It's basically charcoal made from manure and agricultural waste to make hydrogen. And their method uses even less electricity.
Wow, so it seems like this whole waste to hydrogen idea is gaining some serious momentum. But is it really the future of clean fuel? Or are we getting ahead of ourselves here?
Well, it's definitely promising, and there's a ton of potential. But I think we need to be careful about getting carried away. It's unlikely that this technology alone is going to solve all of Japan's energy needs.
Okay, so maybe it's not a silver bullet,
Yeah.
but if it can help reduce our reliance on fossil fuels even a little, that's a big win, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about Japan. This is a global trend. There are people and companies all over the world working on this. It's pretty exciting.
Speaking of which, you mentioned Toyota and the University of Illinois Chicago, but where else are we seeing this innovation really taking off?
Well, let's move from the countryside to the city for a minute. Fukuoka City in Japan has been making hydrogen from a pretty unexpected source for over a decade. They're using sewage.
Wait, sewage? You mean the stuff that goes down our toilets and sinks?
Yep, exactly. They take the sludge from the wastewater treatment plants and they turn it into hydrogen. Then they use it to power a fleet of garbage trucks that don't produce any emissions.
So they're cleaning the city with fuel created from cleaning the city.
Hmm.
That's pretty incredible. How much hydrogen can they actually make from sewage? I mean, is it enough to even make a difference?
Oh yeah, their sewage treatment plant can make a surprising amount of hydrogen. About 300 kilograms in just 12 hours.
Wow. And I read that's enough to fuel something like 30 garbage trucks. It's amazing to think that something we flush down the toilet could power the vehicles that keep our cities clean.
It is. It's a perfect example of a truly closed-loop system. And the fact that Fukuoka City has been doing this successfully for so long really shows how much potential this technology has in cities all over the world.
This is just getting more and more interesting. So are there other cities or countries doing this sewage to hydrogen thing too?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's a company called Concord Blue, and they're developing these waste-to-energy plants in a bunch of different countries. Germany, India, Japan, the US, they're all over the place. And they're turning different types of waste into hydrogen and bioenergy.
It feels like we're at the beginning of a huge shift in how we think about waste. Instead of just trying to get rid of it, we can actually use it to make something good.
I think so, too. It's a step towards a more circular economy where waste is a resource and not just a problem.
I love that idea. But is sewage to hydrogen technology really ready to be used everywhere? I mean, it sounds amazing, but are there still challenges?
Well, that's a question we're going to dig into a little deeper as we continue our deep dive. There's a lot more to uncover.
Okay, so we've established that turning waste into hydrogen isn't just something out of a sci-fi movie. It's actually happening right now, both on farms and in cities. But you've hinted that there are still some big questions surrounding this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. While sewage to hydrogen is super promising, we can't forget that it's still pretty early days. There are definitely some technical and economic challenges to figure out before it becomes a mainstream thing.
So, like, what are some of the biggest things they're working on right now? Is it mainly cost?
Hmm.
Or are there other factors too?
Well, cost is definitely a huge one. Right now, making hydrogen from waste is still more expensive than the traditional methods they use, like steam methane reforming or electrolysis. To make it commercially viable, they've got to bring those costs down. And we need to figure out how to scale up production in a big way.
So we need to move past these smaller pilot projects and start building bigger facilities that can handle way more waste.
Exactly. But it's not just about building bigger plants, it's about making sure this technology can work with what we already have. Like, how can we integrate hydrogen production into the wastewater treatment plants that are already out there? If we can do that, I think it could really change the game.
I see what you mean. We've got these huge wastewater treatment plants everywhere, and if we could just add in hydrogen production, it would be so much more efficient.
Right. And since we're talking about what's already out there, we can't forget about distribution. Right now, we're missing a lot of the things we'd need to move hydrogen around. Pipelines, storage, refueling stations, all designed specifically for hydrogen. And building all of that new infrastructure is going to take a ton of money and a lot of people working together.
It sounds super complicated. It's like this giant puzzle with a million pieces. But before we get too lost in all the challenges, let's go back to Fukuoka City for a sec. They've been doing this for over 10 years, right? And you mentioned they're powering garbage trucks with the hydrogen they make, but what were they using it for in the beginning?
Well, they actually started out using it to power different types of vehicles, things like ambulances, delivery vans, all sorts of stuff. They were trying to show how versatile hydrogen is as a fuel and see if it could really work in everyday life.
So they were ahead of the game. And now they're focusing on garbage trucks. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Why the shift?
Garbage trucks make a lot of sense for a few reasons. For one, they usually stick to the same routes and come back to the same depot each day, so refueling is pretty easy. Plus, they're big, heavy vehicles that are tough to power with those regular electric batteries, so hydrogen fuel cells are a great alternative.
That's really cool. They're taking sewage and turning it into fuel that powers the trucks that pick up more waste. Talk about recycling.
It really is. It shows us what's possible when you start thinking about closed-loop systems where waste isn't just something you throw away, it's something you can use to make things better.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about cow manure, sewage, even chicken waste, and coconut husks. It's like you could make hydrogen fuel from anything. But what are the experts saying about all of this? Is this really going to work long term? Is it all hype? Or is there something real here?
Well, there's definitely a lot of excitement, which makes sense because the benefits could be huge, both for the environment and for, businesses. But like with any new technology, there's also some healthy skepticism. We need to be realistic.
So it's not a sure thing.
Not yet, anyway. We need to be excited, but also grounded in reality. Scaling up production, bringing the costs down, getting the infrastructure in place. These are all things that need to happen. And there's still a lot we don't know yet.
Okay, so maybe it's not a quick fix, but it's a promising step, right?
It's definitely. It's unrealistic to think that this is going to replace all our fossil fuels anytime soon, but
But it could help us depend on them less, which is still a really good thing.
exactly. And the amazing stuff happening in Shikaoi and Fukuoka City gives us a lot of hope. It shows us that things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. Earlier you mentioned something about research on using human waste to make jet fuel. Now that sounds like something out of a movie.
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but researchers in the UK have actually developed a prototype jet fuel that's made entirely from sewage.
Wait, you're saying that someday we could be flying across the country on fuel made from...
It might take some getting used to, but think about it this way. We spend so much money treating and getting rid of sewage. What if we could use it to make something useful, like fuel for airplanes?
I guess that does make sense. But how likely is it that we'll be flying on sewage-powered planes anytime soon? I mean, really?
It's still early, and they need to work out some technical stuff before it could be used commercially. But the fact that they have a prototype that works is a big deal.
Yeah, that's true. At least it shows that it's actually possible. And it's not just jet fuel, right?
Nope. There's even a project in the UK where they're developing a race car that runs on hydrogen made from sewage.
A sewage-powered race car. I've heard everything. Why would they do that?
It's just a really cool and unique way to show people what this technology can do. And it highlights how versatile hydrogen is. I mean, you can use it to power all sorts of things. I'm not saying we'll all be driving sewage-powered cars soon, but it definitely gets people thinking about the possibilities.
For sure. It's definitely a good conversation starter. So we've gone from powering tractors in rural Japan to powering garbage trucks in a big city to maybe flying across the ocean and even racing around a track, all using fuel made from waste. This technology has come a long way.
It really has, and it just goes to show that people can come up with some pretty amazing solutions when they put their minds to it. It's really encouraging. And these innovations aren't just happening in a few places, they're happening all over the world.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So besides the examples we've already talked about, where else are we seeing this waste to hydrogen revolution taking hold?
Well, we already mentioned Concord Blue, which is working on those waste to energy plants in different countries, but there are lots of other things going on too. For example, in the UK, several water authorities are working on projects to make hydrogen from sewage. And they're trying to figure out how to make it work seamlessly with their existing wastewater treatment plants so they can make a lot more of it without it costing a fortune.
That makes sense. If they can use the infrastructure they already have, it'll be so much easier to get this going on a larger scale.
Yeah.
So besides cost and infrastructure, what are some of the other challenges they need to figure out before this waste to hydrogen thing can really take off?
One of the biggest ones is probably public perception. Some people might be grossed out by the idea of using fuel that comes from waste, even if it's been totally cleaned and is safe. So we need to get over that ick factor. We need to help people understand that this technology can be really beneficial.
I can see that being a problem. It's definitely a big change. But wasn't it the same way with electric cars at first? People were skeptical, but then the technology got better and people started to see the benefits.
Exactly. It's all about education and showing people how things work. And as we see more and more examples like the ones we've been talking about, the farms, the city projects, all that, I think people will start to come around.
It makes sense. So it sounds like the biggest challenges aren't just about the technology itself. It's about money, logistics, and even just how people feel about it.
Yeah, you're right. It's complicated. There are a lot of different factors at play. But even though there are challenges, a lot of people think this waste to hydrogen technology could really change how we think about energy and how we deal with waste. It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, after learning about all of this, I'm definitely convinced this has been fascinating. We've seen how people are finding these amazing ways to take something we used to think of as waste and turn it into something useful.
Hmm.
But I'm curious, out of all the different approaches we've talked about, is there one that seems like the best option? Is there a clear winner?
That's a great question, and one that we'll definitely discuss as we wrap up our deep dive. Stay tuned.
You know, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of this whole world of waste to hydrogen. We've seen how it can be used on farms like Shikai, in cities like Fukuoka, even in aviation and racing. And what's really cool is that it's not just about the environment, it's also about creating new opportunities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Turning waste into something valuable opens up so many possibilities for businesses, communities, and even whole industries.
Right? It's like a win-win. We can move away from fossil fuels and create new jobs and industries at the same time. Pretty hard to argue with that.
For sure. And it's something that people from all over can get behind. It's not just about being green. It's about creating a better future for everyone, a more sustainable future, a more prosperous future.
And speaking of that sustainable future, let's go back to the Shikaoi Hydrogen Farm for a minute. You mentioned that they're dealing with some issues with costs and the demand for hydrogen vehicles still being pretty limited. Knowing all that, how do you see this project moving forward?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Chicago isn't just about making money right now. It's more about showing what's possible, proving that this can work. Hopefully, it'll inspire more people to get involved and invest in this type of technology.
So it's like a testing ground, a pilot program for a whole new way of thinking about energy and agriculture. Are there any lessons we can learn from this project that we could use for other projects around the world?
Absolutely. Shikai has shown that creating a closed-loop system where waste becomes a resource is actually achievable. They've also shown how important it is for different groups to work together. Farmers, researchers, the government, they all need to be on the same page. And maybe the most important thing is that they've shown us that even small projects can have a big impact. It can spread and inspire others.
That's awesome. It's a good reminder that amazing ideas can come from anywhere and that we don't have to wait for the big companies or governments to make things happen.
I agree. Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected places.
Okay, so before we finish up, I got to ask, where's the hype meter at on this whole waste to hydrogen thing? Are we getting a little too excited, or is there real reason to be optimistic?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's definitely huge potential, but we got to be realistic. It's still early days for this technology, and there are obstacles to overcome. We can't expect it to solve all our energy problems right away.
But it's a step in the right direction, right? And we've seen today that there are a lot of incredibly smart and dedicated people working really hard to make this happen.
Yeah, for sure. And every step we take towards a more sustainable future is worth getting excited about.
Definitely agree with you there. So, as we wrap up our deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What should they be thinking about as they go about their day?
Hmm. I think the main takeaway is that innovation can come from anywhere. If we can figure out how to turn cow manure and sewage into clean fuel, who knows what else is possible? It really challenges us to think differently. What if we stopped thinking of waste as just garbage, but as something valuable that we can use?
Wow, that's a great point. It really makes you think about the world in a new way. If we all started looking at things a little differently, imagine the possibilities.
Exactly. That's what we need, that creative, outside-the-box thinking. That's how we'll solve the tough problems facing our planet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, we'll leave you all with that thought to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of waste to energy. Until next time, stay curious and keep those imaginations running wild.